Summer may be winding down, but the comic market has been heating up. From blockbuster movies and must-watch TV shows to the wild reveals from SDCC, we've seen some serious shakeups, and yes, the speculators are back in action. With all that excitement, it's a perfect time to talk about budget buys because, let's be honest, things still kind of suck out in the real world. So whether you're looking to stretch your dollars or snag some hot picks, let's dive into the top 10 comics on a $100 budget for the summer of 2024. We're kicking this list off with a book that every dinosaur-loving kid from the 80s and 90s should put on their want list. Our number 10 book is Death Rattle number 8. If you've followed the channel for a while, then you've probably heard me babble about Death Rattle number 1 and its ties to the movie Alien. Well, Death Rattle 8 may share the same publisher and title as that book, but they are far from the same. The first volume of Death Rattle came out in 1972, and it wasn't afraid to go to some pretty dark and gross places in its short 3-issue run. Flash forward to 1985, and Kitchen Sink Press dusted off their old title for a second go at it. Issues 1 through 7 were basically a love letter to EC Comics with horror and sci-fi and other familiar type stories. With issue 8, which was published in December 1986, they stumbled onto something that would break through, but you might not recognize it by its original name. The lead story in Death Rattle 8 was titled Xenozoic, and it was the introduction of Mark Schultz's Xenozoic Tales. Now, if Xenozoic Tales doesn't ring a bell, you may be more familiar with it by the name Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Before it spawned a classic 90s video game, cartoon series, and toy line, all which occurred in 1993, which also is coincidentally the same year that Jurassic Park came out and dinosaurs were once again ruling the world. This was Xenozoic Tales' sole appearance in the Death Rattle title, though it would continue on for another 10 issues of weird and wild stories, while Xenozoic Tales would return in February 1987 with its own self-titled series. Recent sales for Death Rattle 8 have been between $50 and $80, so you can likely snag a copy of this one for your PC and still have a little bit of money jingling in your pocket after the fact. In the number 9 spot, we find the first appearance of Marvel's most overpowered character to date with the Sentry number 1. Cover dated September 2000, Sentry 1 takes us all the way back to the Marvel Knights era, but what I always think of when it comes to this book is the terrible variant cover that accompanied it. We're not talking about that abomination though, we're sticking with the J. Lee A cover, which is pretty nice. But seeing as it's black and gold, and those are our brand colors, I may be a little bit biased, you know. The creative team consisted of writer Paul Jenkins, and Jay Lee also handled the interior pencils and inks in addition to the cover art. Sentry 1 not only introduces the Sentry himself, but also the Void. Now imagine having your own personal poltergeist that constantly taunts you and is powerful enough that it could just end the planet just for grins if, you didn't keep it in check. That's the Void. Anyway, Sentry is rumored to be part of the upcoming Thunderbolts project for the MCU, and while that particular movie isn't generating much buzz at the moment, there's still a bit of interest in the market for Sentry 1. Recent sales for higher grade raw copies have been between $75 and $100, which isn't too bad for what seems to be a slightly difficult book to track down out in the real world. What's better yet, the book is corrected back down to pre-boom prices, which helps make it a little more appealing. All good things must come to an end, and thus is the case with our number 8 book, The Max number 35. Published in February 1998, The Max 35 is the final issue of Sam Keith's The Max, which started 5 years earlier back in March of 1993. Early issues of The Max are some of the most common books you can find from the early 90s, along with a lot of the other early Image titles. But, as is the case with most series, the later issues can be pretty tough to track down. With a print run of under 26,000 copies, the Max 35 may take you some time to hunt up out in the wild. Written and drawn by creator Sam Keith, as per usual, this final tale of the Max was titled Endings and Beginnings. Last fall, a rumor started going around that Paramount was developing a Max movie, supposedly with Channing Tatum working to make that happen. Now, considering that we're still waiting on Tatum's much longer rumored Gambit movie, I'm not going to hold my breath on the Max. What I will say is that I'm fielding a lot more requests for the Max at shows lately. It could be spec, it could be millennials looking to reclaim part of their childhood, it could even be some strange coincidence, but whatever it is, it's great to see collectors diving back into boxes and working on runs again, not just chasing keys all the time. Nearly every recent sale for the Max 35 has been almost dead on at $100, with a surprising amount of sales reporting on eBay in the last several weeks. One thing to keep an eye out for is the IDW reprint, which features the exact same cover art but a slightly modified title of the Max Maximized. While this reprint isn't as valuable as the original, it's still a $50+ book based off of recent sales. The A cover of our number 7 book sent collectors diving into back issues earlier this year with the end of XMen 97, but today we're going to give some shine to its harder to find sibling as we dive into XMen 25 Gold. So one thing that's important to understand is that in the 90s, comic companies had figured out that collectors really liked shiny things. You had chromium, foil, dare I even say the word acetate without inspiring some sort of upheaval in the socials, but essentially, in an effort to lose more money from the hands of comic buyers, the publishers would slap some sort of reflective stuff on their books and sit back and watch the money roll in. This is where we find the number 7 book. Take a regular old X-Men number 25, which was already enhanced with a hologram on the front cover. And then you fill in the title, the issue number, and the corner box with gold ink, and all of a sudden you've got yourself a star. You can even short run them to create some scarcity, and then let's not even talk about the even more difficult to find partial sketch variant of the same issue that's also out there. As most of us likely know, this issue is famous for Magneto ripping the adamantium off of Wolverine's skeleton, but do we know who to blame that on? You can thank Deadpool co-creator Fabian Nicieza for the script, and since it was the 90s and it was an X-Men book, you know that there's going to be a Kubert drawing this one. Here we find Andy Kubert providing both the cover and interior art. These things don't pop up all that often. In fact, I don't know that I've seen more than just one or two in all of my days at comic shows and comic conventions. With that in mind, one of these is going to run you every bit of our $100 budget, and without a fair bit of luck, it's probably going to take you some hunting to track one of these down in the wild. Back in the day, if you wanted to read a comic that wasn't targeted for younger or general audiences, you pretty much had two choices. You could go to the indie publishers, or what would eventually mature into DC's Vertigo imprint. Our number 6 book was one of those founding members of Vertigo, even though it predates it by nearly 5 years. Hailing from DC's late 1980s mature comics line, we have Hellblazer number 1. Cover dated January 1988, Hellblazer number 1 gave our favorite chain-smoking paranormal detective his very own title after he made a splash over in Alan Moore's Swamp Thing number 37 back in 1985. DC baited readers with a fantastic cover from Dave McKean, a tactic that they would continue for some time, even after the macabre cover master started in on the title he's best known for, Sandman, when that series first hit the stands in November 1988. Inside Hellblazer number 1, readers found a story from writer Jamie Delano and art from John Ridgway. Setting the tone right out of the gate, the story, which is titled Hunger, pits Constantine against a hunger and addiction demon named Nemoth. And it's pretty obvious by the end of the story that Hellblazer is far from your standard issue Tights and Flights comic book series. Really nice copies of Hellblazer number 1 have realized prices upwards of $80 in recent weeks, but if you don't mind a few flaws, you can find a copy closer to $50. Just don't dive into this one with the lights off. Swinging into the top half of the list is a controversial first appearance because God knows we needed one more of those. Our number 5 book is Amazing Spider-Man 299. Cover dated April 1988, ASM 299 was just artist Todd McFarlane's second issue on the title. Needless to say, he came out swinging as his first 3 issues are absolute classics for the web-slinger. Partnered with writer David Michelinie for the story titled Survival of the Hittest, the issue's punchline came in the final 4 panels, which fully reveal Venom for the very first time. Now, I'm just saying, if this were Hulk 180, the internet would be clamoring for ASM 299 to be Venom's first appearance. Hell, even Todd McFarlane himself believes that this issue should be Venom's first appearance, but that honor has been swindled away from it by ASM 300 in the market's eyes. If Venom's first appearance or cameo or whatever isn't enough for you, this book is also a movie star, having appeared in 1988's Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, giving it some serious spooky season street cred. Both ASM 298 and 299 have slowly been creeping up in value over the years. I remember when it was dealer's choice at $45 for either one of these, But in today's market, be ready to break out a crisp $100 bill if you want to take home a nice copy of either one of them. Our number 4 book used to be untouchable for less than $300, but somehow the IP finally found its way through the labyrinth of legal limbo, which resulted in the story going back to print for the first time in 25 years. Now, 10 years later, Miracle Man number 15 is available to collectors with just a $100 budget. Cover dated November 1988, Miracle Man was published by Eclipse Comics, who had recently acquired the rights to the character that was originally known as Marvel Man back in the 1950s. For obvious reasons, that wasn't going to play very well in the 80s, so they had to change the name up. In a lot of ways, Miracle Man is where writer Alan Moore's deconstruction of the modern superhero really ramped up after getting its start over in Swamp Thing earlier in the 1980s. Between issues 1 and 15 of Miracle Man, Moore would write and release the entire Watchmen miniseries, Batman the Killing Joke, and even the first 3 issues of V for Vendetta, all of which are essential reading on the topic. Now, as for Miracle Man 15, it solidified itself as one of the most disturbing and controversial comic books in the history of the medium. The short version is that Kid Miracle Man, who used to be Miracle Man's sidekick, he goes off the rails and devastates London in the most shocking ways imaginable. Then Miracle Man shows up and he's got to put down his former sidekick. The Olympus story arc, which Miracle Man 15 is a part of, and it's also the peak of, is most likely the most important comic arc that you've never read. But the story was really all but inaccessible for 2.5 decades. Before the rights were cleared up, it would have cost you more than $500 to acquire the single issues, and even the trade paperback was hundreds and hundreds of dollars if you could find one. Thankfully, prices have come down significantly since Marvel began reprinting the series, and in today's market, you can occasionally find an entire run of the series on eBay that sells for about the same money that issue 15 alone would have cost you 10 to 15 years ago. High-grade raw copies of Miracle Man 15 alone are selling between $70 and $80 recently, which is so much nicer than the $300 to $350 of yesteryear. Coming in at the number 3 spot, we find Daredevil 111, with Daredevil facing off against the Silver Samurai in the villain's first appearance. Cover dated July 1974, DD 111 is one of the few standout issues from this mostly lackluster era of Daredevil. Though it typically associated with Wolverine and the X-Men, Silver Samurai actually predates both Wolverine and the new X-Men team. Thankfully, he didn't hang around in Hell's Kitchen too long because he was soon to be off to bigger and better things, like fighting Wolverine on the regular because he doesn't like Logan dating his half-sister, Mariko. The creative team for the issue consisted of cover artist Ron Wilson, writer Steve Gerber, and interior artist Bob Brown. I've got a thing for collecting villain first appearances, and this is a great example of a villain having an unexpected debut, which can not only make it a fun book to hunt for, but for the 70s, it was kind of par for the course. Marvel was really starting to expand their number of titles at the time, and new characters were springing up all over. Recent sales for high-grade copies have been a little sparse, but they have ranged in the neighborhood of $75 to $100 for the most part. If you do go to pick one up, be sure to verify that it's a complete copy when you find one. It's from those dark days of the Marvel Value Stamp, and inside you should find Marvel Value Stamp number 50, which features the Super Skrull. In the runner-up spot, let's check back in on a Batman key issue that we haven't covered in a couple years. The number 2 book is Batman 258, the first mention of what would become Arkham Asylum. This 100-page DC giant was cover dated for September and October 1974 and packed a beefy 60-cent cover price at a time where the typical comic book was priced at only 25 cents. That said, that same typical comic book was also a fraction of the size. For instance, ASM 136 came out the same month, and it was only 36 pages in total, with just 18 of those 36 being actual story pages. With Batman 258, the main story, Threat of the Two-Headed Coin, which featured one of my favorite Bat villains, Two-Face, came in at 20 pages, and then there were an additional 46.5 pages of Bat stories, making Bat 258 the better bang for your buck back in the day. The main Two-Face story was written by Denny O'Neil and drawn by Ern Novick, while Nick Cardy, who you might recognize from Silver Age Aquaman or many classic Bronze Age horror covers, turned in the cover art for this issue. It's in this main story that readers for the first time hear the mention of Arkham Hospital. Now, this name wouldn't stick, as just 2 issues later, the hospital was rebranded as Arkham Asylum in Batman 260, and it's been the home away from home for Batman's Rogues Gallery ever since. Finding truly high-grade copies of these DC 100-pagers can be quite a chore, which leads to an abundance of low and mid-grade copies that can be had on the cheap. Sales have been pretty erratic this summer, but the general trend seems to be that upper VF and lower near mint range copies are selling between $50 and $80 at the moment. With that in mind, a raw 9.2 is probably going to be the top of what you can handle on a $100 budget, and I'd expect a steep incline in price if you are lucky enough to find an issue that's in better shape than 9.2. Topping the top 10 comics on a $100 budget for the summer of 2024 is Iron Man 150. You know we couldn't do a list post-SDCC this year that did not include some Doctor Doom goodness, right? In my opinion, Iron Man 150 is one of those covers that never really got the love that it deserved. It was cover dated September 1981, and this issue's cover is from legacy artist extraordinaire John Romita Jr. Thankfully, at the time this one went to print, Junior was still drawing like Senior, so we're treated to really nice things like curved lines and inks that were not from Klaus Janson. Iron Man 150 wraps up the Doom Quest story from the preceding issue, but unfortunately it fails to hold on to that cool story name. Since this is an anniversary issue, the Bob Layton written and drawn story, which was titled Nightmare, got the double-sized treatment, and it covers 39 story pages. While Layton gets top billing for both the story and the interior art, he did get an assist from David Michelini on the script and JR on the pencil breakdowns. With the return of RDJ to the MCU as Doctor Doom, this book seems like a no-brainer for collectors, as it features both of his MCU characters in a classic Marvel face-off style cover. I mean, seriously though, when you flip through the spinner rack back in the day and saw a Marvel book with an all-black background and 2 characters squared off, you knew shit was about to go down. I wouldn't be surprised if collectors continue to push the price of this one upward and likely over the $100 mark in the coming months. But for the time being, higher grade raw copies have sales topping out between $80 and $90. All kidding aside though, this is JR's best Iron Man cover since the Demon in a Bottle storyline. The Burr months are just days away and I'm ready for it. And with the clock about to run out for summer, it's all hands on deck over here for the next couple of weeks to get the summer top 10s out before fall officially arrives. Summer's always crazy busy for me in real non-YouTube life, which typically causes the frequency of videos to drop a bit, but as always, I appreciate all of you who hang with me and support the channel through the ebbs and flows of content. Looking at my show calendar, I've got just a few more shows left this year, both of which happen to be in the St. Louis area. Next up is my final Shrewsbury Spectre Club show of the year on September 15th, and the reason for that, the reason we won't be at the November 24th Shrewsbury show, is that we're going to be setting up over at the first ever Tater Tot Comic Show. It's a show that our buddies from Arnold, Missouri, Tater Tot Comics, are putting on for the very first time on November 30th. Now, between those 2 shows, we're hitting the road and we're heading to Norman, Oklahoma for OFCon, which is October 4th through the 6th. This is my absolute favorite comic show of the year. It's one we set aside, we don't set up at, we just go to and have fun. We always have a great time seeing so many of our friends and vendors that are from a bit further south than our usual stomping grounds. Collect responsibly. I'll see you in the next video.